Hi, my name is Jim Fields. I am an entrepreneur who lives in Shanghai, and I've been living and working for the last 14 years here in China. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and when I was a kid, I was surrounded by a lot of friends from Asia, including a lot of friends who are second and third generation Chinese people. And so from when I was very small, I heard a lot of people speaking Chinese, and I found it very interesting. And so when I got to high school, I had the opportunity to study Chinese. Junior year in college, I got a chance to go to Peking University here in Beijing for a study abroad, and that was in 2009. So now it's 2023, about 14 years ago. There's a lot of differences in marketing between the US and China. In China, often there's much more of a focus on direct sales and selling products, as opposed to what happens more often in the West, which usually is about building up a brand or building up a brand value and brand positioning. They often focus a lot more just on sales. How do I sell more products? How do I increase my GMV? Whereas in the West, if you think about these big historical brands like Apple or Coca-Cola or Nike, they spend a lot of time building up brands, building up brand equity, figuring out a way to create a brand and a story that people love. So I think one of the opportunities for Chinese companies is figuring out ways to build up more of the story, build up more of the brand, build up more of that trust with consumers in other markets. Chinese companies, when they go overseas, definitely face some major challenges, but I think the hardest one is probably developing a deep understanding of the market or markets. Oftentimes with a lot of customers here in China, they tend to see the world in very black and white terms. You have what's happening here in China, and you have everywhere else in the rest of the world. But actually the reality is, when you, for instance, have a product and you want to sell it in another market, not only do you need to understand the whole market. For example, you could say, okay, I have this mobile phone battery and I want to sell it in America. But it's not enough just to say you want to sell it in America. You have to develop a specific understanding of a certain set of users in that market that have a need for your product. And that requires even a deeper understanding of region, of language, of socioeconomic background. Deep study and that deep understanding of the target market is the biggest challenge we see for a lot of Chinese brands who want to find success overseas. So I think the advent of these AI tools is really exciting because it allows people to communicate using very natural language in a way that they could never do before. For example, if I go on to ChatGPT and tell it to create a poem for me in classical Chinese about what I had for breakfast, ChatGPT would be able to do that. All these tools that are cropping up now, whether it's image generation or natural language processing or AI text composition, make it really easy to find ways to localize your message and localize your content for different markets. So I would argue that it's one of the best times ever for taking your brand or your product and expanding to new markets, because these AI tools remove a lot of the barriers that used to be there and allow for seamless communication where it wasn't possible before. In 2021, I started working as a YouTuber, creating a lot of content for social media platforms to show people a lot of really cool tech that I saw here in China. As I started to grow my following and get more fans, I actually started to get brands that would come to me and email me, and they would say, hey Jim, can you make a sponsored video for my brand? But because they weren't English native speakers, there would be a lot of problems with the grammar or the way they were written, or they would feel pushy or scammy. And in general, I realized there was this big market where there was all these companies, around 2 million companies here in China that are trying to expand overseas, and in the global market, hundreds of millions of influencers who are creating content. And these two groups of people needed to find better ways to communicate with each other. And so we decided to create a new company, which is called BoostBot. And BoostBot uses the power of AI to connect Chinese merchants and Asian merchants with global influencers to allow them to do sponsored collaborations and create content. It's hard to be an entrepreneur anywhere, whether I was, for instance, in the States, which is where I come from, or operating in many other markets. Every market has its own inbuilt challenges and its inbuilt strengths. Because I have a certain expertise, for instance, in my world, I understand things about influencer marketing, I understand things about tech, I understand things about the US market and how to sell and position products for that market. I have a very unique advantage here in China because I can help brands with my unique set of skills and be able to help them grow their businesses outside of China. Take your assumptions about China and kind of leave them on the side and not necessarily operate in China like you would in your home country. The other big thing I would encourage people to do if you're serious about doing business in China is to learn Chinese, or at least a basic amount of Chinese for communication. I noticed that some foreigners who who just travel here or just do business here. They can't really communicate. But even just learning a little bit of Chinese can go a long way to build trust with the people you meet, to allow you to function better in day-to-day life, and just open a lot of doors that would be closed otherwise. So study your Chinese. So final words of advice for you guys is, whatever you do in life, I think for me in my career, there's been periods of time where I would just sit around thinking about something without ever doing it. And in the time I spent thinking about it, I was actually wasting a lot of time and energy. And if I had just gone and done the thing, or tried to do the thing, I would have learned a lot more.